Let's talk about women and politics. We make up just over half the population, and this year, more women than ever are running as candidates. Not to mention, it's the 100th anniversary of the election where the first woman took her seat in Parliament. If any of you are thinking of making a manifesto pun, just don't. With all that, and an embarrassingly low representation of female minorities in Parliament, why aren't we hearing more about women in this election? Technically speaking, women have never been better represented in British politics, with 206 sitting in the last Parliament. It's really flown up in recent years. And 5 of the parties are led by women this time around. But it's still far from equal. And it often feels like a bit of an old boys' club.
Calm down, dear, calm down, calm down.
And the women who do make it in face way more grief from some of the public.
Just listen to the abuse these MPs receive on a regular basis.
Are you my MP, you're right?
Die, you stupid and stay off TV. Your face makes me want to vomit.
A third of female MPs said they've considered quitting because of abuse. And that has a big effect. One survey found that 50% of 11 to 16-year-olds said that being criticised more than men puts them off becoming leaders. And if you're a female politician, just being heard can be a challenge. Take media appearances. Female politicians, despite growing in numbers, are featuring less and less in the media. In 2017, 39% of all political media appearances were by women. This year, it's down to 20%, although that's partly because Theresa May isn't Prime Minister anymore. And frankly, when the press do get around to talking about female politicians, it doesn't always seem to focus on the policies. What is with that? Women tend to vote in similar numbers to men, but there's one big difference. And it's one we reckon the parties should pay attention to, especially with every vote being so precious in this election. Generally speaking, women are more likely than men to be floating voters or undecideds. That's someone who makes up their mind on how to vote later or switches between the parties. In tight races, they can help swing the result. This happened in the last election as Labour convinced loads of women to vote for them in the campaign.
In 2017, more of women voted Labour than men for the first time in British electoral politics.
That's Professor Rosie Campbell, who knows all things women and politics.
At the moment, the difference is quite substantial, with about 7% men undecided compared to about 19% of women. The reason for this isn't that women are more fickle voters than men. It's to do with the fact that historically women have been less interested in formal politics than men. It's changing over time. As more women have got involved in politics, women have become more interested. Women are actually, for example, more interested in the NHS than men, but less interested in Brexit. But one way or the other, women's votes are going to be key in the outcome of this election.
So an election is called, and suddenly party strategists have to start thinking about how they attract female voters.
Perhaps it's got a bit more sophisticated in recent years, that perhaps women used to be seen as one big block, and now there are much more distinct offers to different ages of women, women who are working, women who aren't working, and certainly more of a recognition of how other policies might affect women.
When it comes to female voters, there's one giant elephant in the room: pay. Women are paid less by the hour than men, by an average of 17.3%. The inequality of that really hit home when the Tories introduced a policy that made companies of a certain size reveal their gender pay gap.
That means fighting against the burning injustice. If you're a woman, you will earn less than a man.
So with the pay gap exposed like that, surely the parties are falling over themselves to fix it. That'd be a well easy way to get women's votes, no?
At this election, there are a lot of policies targeted specifically at women. Labour says it's going to completely close the gender pay gap within 10 years. Conservative pledges include expanding measures that support female entrepreneurs. The SNP want to up maternity pay to 100% of wages for the first 12 weeks. The Lib Dems want company boards to be 40% female. The Greens, they would make misogyny, prejudice against women, a hate crime, with funding and training to tackle it.
Okay, so the parties don't agree on how to address the pay gap, but lots of them are trying to target female voters by making promises on maternity and childcare.
Childcare is quite a big part of this election. Many of the parties are offering to extend free childcare in some form, but what's interesting is they're looking at different stages. So some of the parties are focusing on very young children from sort of 9 months upwards, others are looking at more wraparound care around school days and school-aged children.
What? He's got boobies. It's on TV.
Currently, paid maternity leave lasts 39 weeks. But none of that has to be at full pay. Look at how that compares to other countries. A UNICEF study said that we're one of the worst places in the developed world for maternity leave. That doesn't come as much of a surprise to women in politics. Because of how parliamentary voting works, an MP at the end of her pregnancy once had to delay her C-section so she could come into Westminster and vote. It's an obvious point, but if it's the men who mostly write the rules, then women's issues get left behind. Not only are women underrepresented in Parliament, they're hardly represented at ministerial level, the place where real decisions are made. Over the past 30 years, we've never even had close to equal representation in cabinet. And if you're a woman and a minority, it's even worse. We only got our first female Asian MP a decade ago.
And when you look at gender as a whole, it's even more complex.
We're yet to see a trans or non-binary member of Parliament. And that matters. There's really important trans legislation being proposed at the moment, and not one trans person will vote on it. Let's face it, the challenges are stacked against women in this election. In politics, they get a disproportionate amount of abuse and they still run. In the media, they get overlooked and often at times objectified, they still speak up. And in policy, they often get painted with the same brush and they still vote. And despite all that, they may well hold the keys to this election. Remember, women's tendencies to float their votes and decide at the last minute could really swing things. The question is, will the parties make them an offer they can't refuse? Until next time, see ya.